You know, usually when we talk about a diagnosis, there's this expectation of clinical precision.
Right, like in medicine.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is. That is the problem.
It's totally binary. I mean, you have a fractured bone or you don't. It's something tangible you can literally hold up to the light and categorize.
Right. But then you step into the world of moral philosophy, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, completely.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape of human behavior, of trying to definitively label right and wrong, and it is incredibly murky. I mean, we all have this intuitive sense of justice, but the moment you try to pin down the actual mechanics of it, the whole thing just slips through your fingers.
Yeah, determining what makes a good deed objectively good has arguably been the most difficult diagnosis humanity has ever attempted to make. And the history of philosophy is essentially a graveyard of brilliant minds trying to build a machine that can finally make that measurement.
Which brings us to our mission today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping into a highly specific, fascinating excerpt from a philosophical text, focusing on the new developments in moral philosophy.
Specifically, we're unpacking Chapter 5, which introduces the Doctrine of Positive Emotions.
Right, by philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily. We're drawing straight from the source text today to explore how he attempts to answer this massive question.
It is an incredibly ambitious piece of writing. I mean, Al-Waily is aiming to solve that age-old debate of right and wrong, but he's doing it by completely rewiring how we think about our own minds. He's attempting to bridge the massive historical gap between abstract philosophy and actual mechanical human psychology.
Because I think you, listening to this, probably have to ask yourself at some point, what is the actual engine of a good deed? Like, is it a rigid set of rules we force ourselves to follow?
Or is it some sort of mathematical calculation where we try to maximize happiness?
Right. Or is it something rooted much deeper in our biology?
Well, to understand the sheer scale of what Al-Waily is proposing, we first really need to look at the historical merry-go-round of morality that frustrated him in the first place.
The graveyard of ideas you mentioned.
Exactly. For centuries, you had these towering intellectual figures trying to build that moral X-ray machine, and according to Al-Waily, every single one of them built a flawed device.
He essentially looks back at the greatest hits of philosophy and points out exactly where the wheels fell off.
He does, and he categorizes these historical failures quite systematically. Take Immanuel Kant, for example.
Okay, yeah, let's start with Kant.
So Kant's entire framework rested on the concept of strict duty. According to Kant, if you do something good out of hope for a reward or fear of punishment, it just doesn't count as a moral act.
Which makes sense on the surface.
Right, but he took it even further. He said, if you do something good just because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside, that also has zero moral value.
Right, really. Zero.
Zero. It must be done purely out of a cold, rational sense of duty.
That is such a bleak way to look at the world. I mean, if I visit a sick friend in the hospital because I deeply love them and want to comfort them, Kant says I get no moral credit.
No moral credit for love, no.
But if I resent going, and I only do it out of a grim sense of social obligation, suddenly I'm a moral paragon.
That is the exact trap Kant created, yeah.
Yeah.
Then, swinging to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have utilitarianism.
Right, like Epicurus and John Stuart Mill.
Exactly. They argued that morality is simply about maximizing pleasure or general happiness. The right thing to do is whatever brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people.
So if Kant is demanding we act like unfeeling robots doing our chores, the utilitarians are just trying to plan the most efficient global party.
That's a great way to put it. And even that gets complicated when you introduce Auguste Comte's concept of altruism, which the text also examines.
How does Comte fit into this?
Well, Comte essentially demanded that people live entirely for others, like complete, unwavering self-sacrifice.
Which feels entirely unsustainable. I mean, if everyone is completely sacrificing themselves for everyone else who is actually left to enjoy the benefits, it feels like a mathematical impossibility.
Friedrich Nietzsche certainly thought so.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Yeah, Nietzsche pushed back violently against all of this with his philosophy of power. He believed that the whole concept of morality, particularly concepts like duty or altruism, were actually just tricks.
Tricks invented by the weak to restrict the strong, right?
Exactly. To Nietzsche, duty was as foolish and mindless as the busy work of a drone bee serving a hive.
Nietzsche definitely didn't pull any punches.
Yeah.
But the text doesn't just stick to Western philosophy either.
No, it doesn't. Al-Waily also looks eastward, referencing Buddhism. In this specific context, he describes the Buddhist approach as seeking a world of beauty by actively eliminating desire.
Because desire causes suffering.
Right, the logic being that desire is the root cause of all human pain, so to be moral and peaceful, one must extinguish the flame of want entirely. And finally, he points to Herbert Spencer's evolutionary perspective, the idea that morality isn't some high-minded philosophical concept at all.
It's just biology.
Just an evolved instinct. The behaviors that helped the human species survive simply got labeled as good over time.
Okay, so it feels like we have half a dozen different compasses pointing in entirely different directions here.
Yeah, it's a mess.
You have strict duty, pleasure maximization, endless self-sacrifice, ruthless power dynamics, the total elimination of desire, and basic evolutionary survival. Why does Al-Waily look at this incredible array of theories and conclude that every single one of them missed the mark?
Well, Al-Waily believes they failed because the science of psychology simply wasn't advanced enough to support their philosophical theories.
Oh, interesting.
They were trying to build towering ethical frameworks without actually understanding the foundational mechanics of the human mind.
But psychology has been a recognized field for a long time. I mean, we've mapped out the conscious versus the subconscious. We analyze dreams. We treat complex mental illnesses. Surely the historical philosophers had some grasp on how the brain works.
They had pieces of the puzzle, sure. But Al-Waily argues they fundamentally failed to clearly distinguish between three critical things: emotions, instincts, and mental faculties.
Okay.
Psychologists had kind of lumped these together into a messy soup.
So if we imagine the human mind as a car, the historical philosophers were looking at the vehicle moving down the street, but they couldn't tell the difference between the steering wheel, the engine, and the tires.
Exactly.
They just knew the car was rolling.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it, because the psychologists of his time couldn't give him a clear mechanical schematic of the mind. Al-Waily steps in to define it himself.
Okay, let's get into his schematic then.
He states that the mind operates using 5 distinct mental faculties: perception, retention, memory, deduction, and will.
Let's slow down and define those, because I want to make sure you as the listener really understand this machinery.
Sure.
So perception is taking in the world around us. Retention is holding on to that data. Memory is recalling it later. Deduction is making logical sense of it all. And will is the final choice to take an action.
Yes. Those are the steering wheel and the navigation system of your car analogy. They process information and direct the vehicle.
Got it.
But here is the crucial pivot in Al-Waily's theory. None of those faculties are the actual fuel.
Okay.
And he argues that instincts aren't the fuel either. He defines instincts as merely organic, physical movements that accompany a reaction. An instinct is just a reflex, like the flinch when you touch a hot stove.
So the tire's turning on the road.
Precisely. The true core of morality, the absolute center of human behavior, and the actual combustion engine driving the whole system lies in the emotions.
I have to push back here.
Go for it.
He's looking at thousands of years of complex ethical debate, all these massive volumes on duty and utilitarian math, and reducing the entire human experience to good emotions versus bad emotions. That sounds dangerously reductive. It sounds like he's saying morality is just about good vibes.
It is really easy to misinterpret it that way at first glance, but Al-Waily's Doctrine of Positive Emotions is not about fleeting good vibes.
Okay, what is it?
It is a highly structured, rigorous internal accounting system. It's almost a mathematical approach to human feeling.
Walk me through the accounting then. How does this emotional ledger actually work?
Under his doctrine, moral acts are strictly those associated with positive emotions.
Oh.
We are talking about fundamental drivers like love, compassion, joy, and courage.
And the immoral acts.
Conversely, immoral acts are tied exclusively to negative emotions: hate, anger, sorrow, cowardice, and fear.
Okay, but I see an immediate loophole here.
What's the loophole?
What happens when my positive emotion directly harms someone else? Let's say I experience immense, genuine joy from stealing cars.
Okay, a car thief.
Right, the adrenaline, the thrill, the profit, it fills me with positive emotion. Under a simple reading of this doctrine, my car theft is generating joy. Does Al-Waily say car theft is moral just because I'm having a great time?
He anticipates that exact conflict. This is where those mental faculties we discussed earlier come back into play, specifically deduction or reason.
The navigation system.
Exactly. Reason acts as the ultimate auditor of this emotional ledger. It calculates that general universal positive emotions like societal harmony, universal love, and safety must fundamentally outweigh specific selfish positive emotions.
So reason is sitting there with a spreadsheet auditing the transaction of the car theft.
Yes. And reason sees that your personal joy from stealing the car creates a massive cascading deficit of negative emotion.
I see.
There is the immediate trauma and sorrow of the victim. There's the fear it instills in the neighborhood. There is the anger of the community.
So the math doesn't add up.
The auditor looks at that transaction, sees the overwhelming negative emotional debt it creates overall, and completely rejects the act as immoral. Your selfish joy bankrupts the wider system.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's stress test this in the extreme opposite direction.
Okay.
The source text brings up the example of saints, or martyrs, people who completely sacrifice themselves, sometimes enduring horrific physical pain or death for a cause.
Right.
How does the internal auditor justify that? Where's the joy in suffering? Under this system, shouldn't suffering be inherently immoral?
That is perhaps the most profound part of Al-Waily's framework. He argues that the saint who sacrifices themselves isn't actually devoid of joy.
They aren't.
No. To the outside observer, they are in pain, but internally, they are fulfilling their absolute highest positive emotions, their deep, profound love and compassion for humanity.
Wow.
Even amidst physical agony, they are reaping the immense internal joy of their sacrifice and the knowledge of the positive legacy they are leaving behind.
So their internal spreadsheet is actually overflowing with positive emotional value, even if their physical body is being destroyed.
Yes. The positive emotion of universal love completely eclipses the negative physical pain.
That entirely changes how we are taught to view selflessness. Because if even saints get a profound sense of internal joy from their sacrifice, does that mean true, sterile selflessness is a myth?
That's a great question.
Are we all just chasing a return on investment, just trading in emotional currency instead of money?
Al-Waily actually rebrands the whole concept of selfishness to address this. He divides egoism into two distinct categories. First, there is righteous egoism.
Righteous egoism, what is that?
This is when you take actions to benefit yourself, to generate your own joy, but those actions do not harm anyone else.
Like taking a nap when you're exhausted, or enjoying a really good meal.
Yes. Al-Waily says righteous egoism is completely moral and good. Generating positive emotion for yourself is a moral act, provided it doesn't create a deficit for someone else.
And the second category.
That would be false egoism. This is the car thief, benefiting yourself by harming others.
Got it.
Al-Waily points out that false egoism is not only immoral, but it's also mathematically flawed in the long run. It eventually backfires, bringing isolation, paranoia, and deep negative emotions right back to the person who committed the act.
That framing completely alters how we should look at everyday altruism. Like, think about the people who spend their weekends volunteering at a soup kitchen. Sometimes people feel guilty because they realize they volunteer, partly because it makes them feel good.
Yeah, people struggle with that a lot. But Al-Waily argues that pure altruism, the idea of helping someone else while feeling absolutely nothing for yourself, just acting as a blank slate of service, it doesn't exist.
It's impossible.
Helping others inherently provides internal satisfaction, relief, or joy to the person doing the helping.
And he's saying that getting a warm, fuzzy feeling from volunteering doesn't make us frauds. We don't have to feel miserable to prove we are good people.
To the contrary, that positive feeling is the literal engine of morality. The joy you feel is the proof that the act is moral.
That is incredibly freeing for you as a listener, I think.
Absolutely. And this also informs his heavy critique of asceticism, the practice of severe self-discipline where people abstain from all forms of pleasure, like starving yourself in a cave to prove your spiritual purity.
Oh, right. How does the emotional auditor view the guy starving in the cave?
As a moral failure.
Really?
Depriving yourself of life's pleasures just for the sake of suffering generates pointless negative emotion. It creates a deficit for no reason.
So it's just bad math.
Yes. Al-Waily states the only time asceticism is moral is if you are willingly depriving yourself specifically to console others who are deprived.
Okay, so if you are fasting in solidarity with the hungry, that is moral because it is driven by compassion, a positive emotion.
Exactly.
But if you are just suffering to prove how tough you are failing the accounting test.
Precisely. And armed with this new, rigorous accounting framework, it becomes very clear why Al-Waily dismantled those historical philosophers we discussed earlier.
Oh, let's circle back to them. Let's look at them through this new lens.
Sure. So remember Socrates. He famously claimed that knowledge leads to virtue. If you simply know what is right, you will automatically do what is right.
But we know that's not true. I mean, there are plenty of brilliant people who do horrific things. They have the knowledge, but their emotional compass is pointing toward greed or malice.
Right. Al-Waily would say Socrates relied entirely on the mental faculty of deduction, but ignored the fuel. You cannot think a bad person into being good.
You need the positive emotions.
You need willpower, and crucially, that knowledge must be ignited by positive emotions.
And what about Kant? How does the emotional ledger handle that concept of strict duty?
Al-Waily argues that duty is a dangerously empty vessel. If you remove emotion, duty can be filled with anything.
What do you mean?
He points out that in some primitive cultures, brutal, blood-soaked revenge is considered a sacred, undeniable duty. People commit generational atrocities because they believe it is their rational duty to their ancestors.
Because duty doesn't have an internal check against suffering. But positive emotions do. Genuine love and compassion don't accidentally lead to blood feuds.
Exactly. Positive emotions offer a grounded, mathematically stable guide, and this same logic completely dismantles Nietzsche's philosophy of power.
Because power requires victims.
Yes, an obsession with power fundamentally requires the subjugation of others. Subjugation generates massive, sprawling negative emotions: fear, resentment, misery. Nietzsche's ideal world operates at a permanent, catastrophic emotional deficit.
I'm curious how he applies this to Buddhism, then. If Buddhism seeks to eliminate desire to escape pain, aren't they trying to zero out the ledger entirely? Like, no debt, but no assets either.
That is the perfect way to phrase his critique. Al-Waily argues that it is a fundamental miscalculation to try and eliminate all desire.
Because some desires are good.
Positive desire, the desire to love, to create art, to connect with a community, bring vital joy. They are the positive assets on the ledger.
Right.
If you eliminate positive desires, you are left with an empty vault. And you need those positive emotional reserves to combat the inevitable, unavoidable pains of human life.
So Al-Waily respects that these historical thinkers were examining the mechanics of the human condition, but he believes their systems collapsed because they are either ignoring the fuel of emotion or actively trying to drain it from the engine.
They lack the psychological blueprint to understand what actually drives us.
Okay, so how do we take this blueprint and apply it mathematically to society today? Because if we look around, the world is currently operating with a massive amount of negative emotional debt.
That's an understatement.
Hate, fear, and anger are incredibly prevalent. How does Al-Waily suggest we fix the ledger?
Well, on an individual level, it requires active, conscious effort. You cannot simply suppress negative emotions. You have to actively fight them with positive ones.
Like a workout.
Yeah. When you feel hate, you must use your mental faculties, your reason, to consciously redirect that energy toward love and logical thinking, effectively starving the negative emotion of its power.
It's an active practice. You have to continually flex that emotional muscle.
But Al-Waily is highly pragmatic too. He recognizes that individual effort is entirely insufficient if the societal structure is broken.
Which it often is.
Right. For a society to achieve a positive moral balance, it requires structural pillars. Yes, we need ethical education and good role models, but crucially, he argues that society must guarantee security against disease, hunger, and ignorance.
This makes perfect sense within his framework. I mean, if you are starving, if you don't know how you are going to protect your family from a preventable illness, your mind is entirely consumed by fear, anxiety, and survival instincts.
Exactly.
Those are intense negative emotions.
You cannot demand that people generate universal love and compassion when their basic survival ledger is deeply in the red.
That reframes poverty and lack of health care from being merely political issues to being fundamental mathematical barriers to human morality. A social safety net isn't just a nice idea. It is a prerequisite for a moral society.
It is the only way to stabilize the collective ledger. And this actually brings us to what is arguably the most profound revelation in Al-Waily's text, his definition of the conscience.
Oh, I wanted to get to this.
In Arabic, the term used is al-widan.
Al-Widan.
For centuries, humanity has treated the conscience as this mystical, ethereal thing. A divine spark, a ghost in the machine, an angel sitting on your shoulder whispering the right answers.
Jiminy Cricket, this external force that constantly judges us.
Exactly, Jiminy Cricket. But Al-Waily strips all of that mysticism away. He states that the conscience is literally just the aggregate sum of your positive emotions.
The aggregate sum.
It is nothing more and nothing less than the combined total of your capacity for love, compassion, joy, and tenderness. If you were to somehow surgically remove those specific emotions from a human being, their conscience would instantly vanish.
That is staggering. It completely demystifies the voice in our heads. It means we aren't born with a fixed magical moral compass.
No, we aren't.
The conscience is an emotional muscle that we build ourselves over a lifetime. It is the crude interest of every positive emotion we've nurtured.
And because the conscience is tied to our emotions, which can be nurtured, educated, and grown, Al-Waily ends his chapter with a profound sense of optimism.
It is surprisingly uplifting.
He firmly believes that humanity, despite all our horrific stumbles and historical deficits, is continually evolving toward the good. Generation by generation, we are slowly expanding our aggregate capacity for positive emotions.
If we pull all of this together, it creates a wildly different lens through which to view our own lives. Morality isn't a cold, sterile calculation of duty.
Right.
It's not a ruthless pursuit of dominance, and it's not the total erasure of our desires. According to Al-Waily, morality is the deliberate, conscious cultivation of positive emotions, guided by the careful auditing of our own reason to ensure that our personal joy never extracts a cost from someone else.
I would encourage you, as you go about your week, to apply this internal auditor to your own difficult decisions. The next time you are unsure of what to do, don't just ask yourself, what are the rules? Or what is my duty here?
What should they ask?
Ask yourself, what is my emotional ledger telling me right now? Am I operating from a foundation of love and compassion, or am I reacting out of a deficit of anger and fear?
It's a powerful tool for self-reflection. But I want to leave you with a final lingering question inspired by this text. A bit of a provocation to test the limits of Al-Waily's doctrine.
Oh, let's hear it.
If Al-Waily is right, and our conscience is strictly the sum total of our positive emotions, what happens if we cheat the math?
Cheat the math.
Let's take it a step further into the future. Imagine we eventually invent a technology, a neural implant, or a perfectly synthesized medication that artificially locks the human brain into a constant, uninterrupted state of profound joy and positive emotion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No side effects, just endless chemically induced love and happiness. Does Al-Waily's doctrine mean that by doing this we have automatically achieved perfect morality? Or does the fact that the emotion is artificial mean the moral ledger is counterfeit?
If the auditor's spreadsheet shows endless joy and no negative debt anywhere in society, does the source of the joy actually matter to the math?
It brings us right back to the beginning. We spent all this time trying to build the perfect moral X-ray machine. Al-Waily gave us an incredible, elegant schematic based on the reality of human emotion. But if we alter the very nature of how those emotions are generated, we might just find ourselves staring at a broken X-ray machine all over again.
It seems the search for a permanent moral diagnosis is never truly finished.
Never finished indeed. Keep asking the hard questions, keep checking your ledger, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.